This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg here in South Africa. I'm Evan Hansen. The show is always live and it's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. Don't forget, we are live on YouTube right now. You can also watch us back a little bit later on our YouTube channel if you missed this. Today, we look at the reaction to Parliament's acceptance of the Nkandla report in the National Assembly yesterday. Then, the Rand has hit a 14-year low. We ask why and how do we overcome it? Interesting stat. South African women are 5 times more likely to commit murder than women in the rest of the world. So this brings us to our question of the day to you. What do you think drives South African women to commit murder? At SABC Newsroom is where we want your interactions. In our weekly book slot, we also talk to author Carla van der Spey about this, and her book is called Blood on Her Hands, that deals with female homicide. Also, 500,000 disabled South African children are excluded from formal education. We also look at plans to decriminalize sex work. Today we'll have those opposed to it right in studio to give us their point of view. But first, let's get the day's news from Anita Mel.
Good morning, I'm Anita Mel. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. Justice and Correctional Service Minister Michael Mashuta says he will know whether the release of Oscar Pistorius is lawful by Friday. Mashuta is seeking legal advice on whether the parole board was right to approve the release of Pistorius. He decided to seek for advice after receiving a petition from the Progressive Women's Movement of South Africa.
In the process of responding or considering that petition from that organization, he has to satisfy himself that the process followed in arriving at a decision to place Mr. Pistorius under correctional supervision by the parole board is in compliance with the law.
Meanwhile, the slain Riva Steenkamp would have celebrated her 32nd birthday today. The lawyers of the Steenkamp's parents have asked the media to respect their privacy as they remember their daughter today.
They would have loved to have celebrated her 32nd birthday with her. Unfortunately, they're not able to do so, so they don't want to speak to the media. They really just want their privacy to be respected, celebrate her life, celebrate what she stood for. They want to focus on the Riva Rebecca Steenkamp Foundation, which is something that's very dear to their hearts now.
The situation outside the Roodepoort Primary School seems to be calm this morning. Gauteng Education MEC Panyaza Lesufi says he'll meet with the mediation team as well as community representatives today. This in an effort to resolve the impasse at the school west of Johannesburg. Lesufi says that learners will continue with lessons at the new Lufereng Primary School in Pretoria Glen in Soweto. The Roodepoort Primary School was temporarily shut down on Monday. 2 police officers are still being treated in hospital after a shootout in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg. They were shot while trying to arrest a suspect in an assault case. The suspect shot himself and died on the scene. Police say a 3rd officer, who was also injured in the incident, has been released from hospital. The National Prosecuting Authority will formally withdraw the charges against its deputy head, Mkobo Jiba, today. The newly appointed head of the National Prosecuting Authority, Sean Abrams, made the announcement yesterday. He says the decision was made following consultations with various legal experts who agreed that the case was not winnable. Jiba was expected to go on trial today on charges of fraud and perjury. Well, remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can, of course, also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anina. The Democratic Alliance will file papers in the High Court in Cape Town today to challenge the constitutionality of Police Minister Nathi Nhleka's Nkandla report. This comes after the National Assembly approved the ADA Committee's report, which, of course, exonerated President Jacob Zuma from any liability in the upgrades of security at his Nkandla homestead. The ADA committee was set up to consider the Nhleka report, which also exonerated the president from paying back any money on non-security upgrades. The Nhleka report contradicted that of Public Protector Thuli Madonsela, which recommended remedial action by the President. The National Assembly adopted the report of the ADA Committee on Nkandla with 198 members voting in favour and 93 against. There were no abstentions. Now, our very own reporter, Mandalisi Dupasi, joins us from Cape Town. He's with the Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, Lawson Naidoo. Mandalisi, a very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben.
Just set the scene for us after yesterday before you do the interview.
Even as we spoken yesterday, that it looked like the Nkandla matter is far from over. I mean, I told you yesterday that the opposition parties said that yesterday's sitting was their last resort to exhaust all parliamentary avenues. As a means of trying to resolve this matter amicably. But they failed. It eventually went to a vote, and as you just said now, the ANC used its majority, and they voted for this ad hoc committee report. But now, this morning, as we talk right now, the opposition parties are just 2 blocks away at the Cape High Court, where they are where now this matter is going to. And we will see what happened after the 18th of September, because that's when they will be taking it now, probably straight to the SCA in Bloemfontein. But it's not only the parliamentarians, Eben, who have an interest in this matter. It's a whole many people, including non-government organizations, as you just said earlier on. I have here Mr. Naidoo from CASEC. Mr. Naidoo, thank you very much for joining us. And tell me, what's your take on this whole issue of Nkandla?
Well, I think, we must go back to the fact that there was a report from the Public Protector in March of 2014, to which the President has not responded properly as yet. It is a report that the Public Protector conducted in terms of the Executive Members Ethics Act, which obliges the President to respond to that report. There's been a failure to do so. He's tried to delegate the responsibility to respond to the Minister of Police and to the Minister of Public Works and indeed to Parliament. It is being argued, and will be argued in court, that it is not appropriate for the President to delegate that responsibility in that way, and that ultimately both Parliament and the Executive, being the President, have failed to properly engage with the report of the Public Protector, and I think that is the matter that is now going to end up before the courts to make a determination.
Are you also going to join the opposition parties in a court action?
We have been taking legal advice and exploring what remedies might be available in respect of this matter. There's also, as you pointed out, there's an appeal pending in the Supreme Court of Appeal on the 18th of September, emanating from the case that was brought by the DA in relation to the Public Protector's report on the SABC, which goes on appeal to the Supreme Court, and that decision will determine the extent of the powers of the Public Protector. It's very likely that this matter will ultimately end up in the Constitutional Court, and perhaps we do need that clarity from the highest court in the land on the nature and extent of the powers of the Public Protector and how organs of state are expected to respond to the findings and remedial action by that office.
And very briefly, Lawson, is it a constitutional matter or is it a matter concerning the law?
It is both, because it is firstly and foremostly a constitutional matter, because the Chapter 9 institutions that are set up under the Constitution are there to assist in consolidating and supporting democracy in South Africa. It's an independent office established by the Constitution, which says that it has the power to take remedial action. So that's the constitutional aspect. When we look at the actual act, the Public Protector Act, it is less forthright than stating to take remedial action. So those are some of the issues that the courts are going to have to provide guidance and to pronounce upon. Exactly what does it mean when the Constitution says that the Public Protector has the power to take remedial action? To what extent are those powers binding? To what extent is there responsibility on organs of state to respond?
Still on these legal matters, we heard yesterday that the NPA has actually dropped charges against Ms. Nomgcobo Jiba. So, what's CAG's take on that one?
Well, again, I mean, this is similar to the dropping of the charges by Advocate Mokotedi Mshe against President Zuma in April of 2009, where it's an administrative decision taken by the NPA to drop those charges, whereas I think many people would prefer to see the matter being aired in court and for the court to make a determination as to whether sufficient evidence exists for her to be convicted on a charge of perjury. We must remember that it's not just one court, there are 3 courts that have now pronounced on the lack of professional etiquette demonstrated by Advocate Jiba in various cases, the fact that she's not been truthful to the courts. These are very serious concerns that really have to go at the very heart of her fitness to hold office. So a case like this before the courts is the proper place for that matter to be determined. Unfortunately, it seems that is another issue that is now going to be drawn out through a legal process that could take some years.
Mr. Naidu, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
And that's all we had here in Parliament. Even.
Thank you very much, Mandalisi, for that update. Mandalisi Dibase, dealing with a couple of issues in Parliament. Of course, one of the key issues in South Africa this week, of course, is around Oscar Pistorius. Yesterday we asked you, the viewer, what do you think of Oscar Pistorius being released in Women's Month? And here is some of the responses that we've had around this issue. Of course, a very emotional scenario today is would have been Reeva Steenkamp's 32nd birthday. And there it says, Keith says, at SABC Newsroom, it doesn't really matter when the release date is. It's about whether justice is exercised fully. Thank you very much, Keith. That's Laura says, at SABC Newsroom, must be nice being Oscar. Kill your partner and serve a 6th of your term. Justice clearly failed, she says. Keith is back. He says, SABC Newsroom, the issue isn't about whether it's Women's Month. It's about whether the release is based on fairness and morality. And that's been tested in the court, yes, Keith, and it's going to go to the High Court to be tested even further. Let's move on and take a look now at our pick of the day. This one comes from our very own reporter from Norma Bulani. It's captioned #Roodepoort Primary. It says, talks about EFF members here. Do we have that picture? EFF members here saying community asked them to intervene. Why are we not surprised? But the parents there disputed. That one from a very own reporter. Yes, it's been an emotional day. There have been lots of reports coming in of the unhappiness with the SABC now around this issue. But let's move on and see what's happening elsewhere in the world. These are the headlines from the front pages from around the globe. We start in China. The South China Morning Post reports that an Australian model and English tutor who was questioned by Thai police after being accused online of being the Bangkok bomber said he was in shock and saddened by what had happened. Moving to Europe, the Times says that health officials have endorsed e-cigarettes for the first time, claiming that they are a game changer in the battle with smoking, the country's biggest killer. And finally, in the US, the USA Today reports that Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump released a position paper on Sunday detailing his strategy for reforming the United States immigration policy. Well, that would be very interesting, would it? Now, the South African rand hit a fresh 14-year low of nearly 13 rand to the dollar. Last week that was, and was at its weakest ever against the British pound. This as emerging markets bore the brunt of a fallout from a surprise move by the People's Bank of China to weaken its currency. Fears are that it will reach the 13 rand mark, which will be an all-time low. The rand is expected to come under pressure from inflation, and retail figures for July due to be released in the US today. Analysts said the threat of wage strikes in the gold sector here brought back to the fore investors concerned about the ailing South African economy, which is also grappling with its worst electricity crisis since 2008. After the break, we'll speak to the Chief Executive Officer of Kaon Capital, Bridget Taylor, about this. Don't go away. You're watching Newsroom right here on SABC News.
city of Durban and its surroundings is one that is filled with history and cultural diversity.
Durban is a natural paradise known for its gorgeous coastline of sun-kissed beaches and subtropical climate.
Flea markets are essential to visit if you want to experience Durban's Afro-Oriental atmosphere.
The city of Durban is an elegant, mature and ambitious city. The vendors at the Vic offer a range of African and Oriental products, an eclectic mix that is hard to resist.
That's Kaleidoscope, Sundays at 5:30 p.m. CAT.
Now let's go back to that story. Well, the rand has hit its lowest level against the greenback, the US dollar, nearly 13 rand to the dollar in 14 years. Now we are on Skype. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Current Capital, Bridget Taylor. Very good morning to you, Bridget. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Bridget, before we talk about the outcomes, why is the rand taking such a beating at the moment?
Well, I think we've been punished a little bit. I mean, we've had quite a lot of negative data, and if you look at what's happening globally with regards to the dollar's quite strong, the oil prices come off, we've seen commodity prices come off, and even our stock market. I mean, we're seeing the South African stock market very, very mixed. The global picture around growth is quite negative, and in South Africa, we've got a lot of fundamental issues. So when we talk about fundamentals, we're talking about things like you know, it's expensive to employ people. It's expensive to buy electricity. We're not always sure that the electricity is going to be on. We're not sure about whether or not our officials in politics are corrupt or not, where the money's going, etc. So all of these types of messages are negative for foreign investors. And that really means that people take their money out of South Africa and they put it into other places, which unfortunately means that the rand weakens.
Now, Bridget, I read this morning that this time round, let's call it it's not such a big problem for policymakers in South Africa. Do you share that view?
Look, I'm not sure that I do share that view. I think that I feel like we're a frog in boiling water. In other words, you know, when it's warm, it's warm. It starts to get a little bit hotter, and we don't really pay any attention to that. And it's starting to get quite hot now. And are we going to get to a stage where we can't jump out of the hot pot anymore, or are we going to continue along the same path? I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the rand's currently trading at levels that we haven't seen in 14 years. And that should tell you that we've got to pay attention to the fact that there's trouble brewing. We need those foreign investors. We need to see people investing money for the long term in the South African market with regards to business, etc. And I am concerned that policymakers are not necessarily paying enough attention to that, specifically in an environment where it's only getting worse, it's not getting better. You know, if we look at the likes of the United States who are coming back online, they're starting to see some growth. We look at the UK, they're starting to see some growth. Even the Eurozone, who we all are concerned about, are in fact starting to see some growth. Yet in South Africa, and we're part of Africa, which is one of the most robust continents, we've got very, very slow growth, and that's going to affect everybody. It doesn't matter who you are, whether you live in a township, whether you live in a big house in Sandhurst, it affects everybody, and that includes the politicians. So it does concern me that there's not enough emphasis being placed on this, and we sort of wipe it under the carpet and hope it'll go away.
Within that context, what do you think will be the direct effect it will have on inflation here in South Africa?
Well, I mean, at some point it's going to impact the price that you pay for food. So a lot of food we import, which means that instead of paying 11 rand for a dollar when you're buying a ton of maize or you're buying a ton of goods, whatever those are, you're suddenly paying 13 rand. So that effectively what happens is that the guys that are producing these will then start to have to charge you more for that. So whether that's milli-meal, whether that's petrol, whether that's goods that you buy, be they furniture, be they clothing, all of those things start to cost a lot more. And because of that, inflation starts to pick up. And effectively what that means is you have less money to spend, even though you're earning the same amount of money. It just means your money goes a lot less. You know, you can buy less for a rand.
And what are the investors saying right now?
Well, I think investors, I mean, if we look at just the South African market, South African investors, by and large, are very, very cautious. We talk about it in the financial markets and say that the market's long cash, which means that they're sitting on big savings and they're not really investing that money, which means that they're concerned about what they're likely to get back in terms of their money. The big concern, though, is that we're not seeing foreign investors coming into South Africa because of the various issues that we have, which I mentioned earlier. They rather go and invest their money in Kenya or invest it in Ghana or Zambia because there's better growth there. And we really do need to change that sort of perception of South Africa to attract those types of flows and to encourage the local companies to invest more money and not to sit on their cash and savings.
And what do we need to do next? Do we need the government to intervene, or do we need to leave the markets to kind of correct itself?
Well, we always say markets never lie because you've got buyers and sellers. You've always got two sides of the equation. So because of that, markets correct themselves. But what the market is telling you is that we're in trouble. We're trading at very low levels, which means that the market's not happy with what's happening in South Africa. And that's not a South African view only, that's a global view. From a political perspective or from a business perspective, I think, one of the big things that's missing in South Africa is that partnership between business and government, and trust being placed where business really does trust government, government trusts business, because together there's more employment created, there's more investment created, there's more opportunity created, and everybody wins. But, it does require putting your pride in your pockets, sitting down around a table and negotiating around the best way forward, and doing that in an environment where you can be trusted, where you're not being perceived to be corrupt or to be to have an ill agenda, where you're doing things that only benefit you. This has to benefit the whole country, because if everybody wins and if the government gets involved with business, what ultimately means is that government wins because they create better opportunities for the people, and business wins because there's more people that want to purchase their products.
Bridget, thank you for that contribution this morning. That's the Chief Executive Officer of K1 Capital, Bridget Taylor, giving us her views on why the rand is taking such a beating international markets. Of course, today Riva Steenkamp would have celebrated her 32nd birthday. Her parents issued a statement saying, well, they're still struggling to come to terms with their loss. Of course, Oscar Pistorius will be released under correctional supervision in just 2 days' time. Here are some of your views. Carrie says, happy birthday, dearest Riva. Please, God, protect and guide Oscar as he comes home, starts his path to redemption and restoration. Tabo, of course, he says, as convicted murderer Oscar Pistorius prepares for his release, the Steenkamp remember Riva on what would have been her 32nd birthday. Kanya says, happy 32nd birthday, Riva Steenkamp. That's a sentiment that's shared by most people in South Africa. There's a wonderful picture, an iconic picture of Riva Steenkamp, 1983 to 2013. 19 August 1982, she would be celebrating her birthday today. Strength to the Steenkamps, says Ikwena. Lovely note, lovely picture, absolutely beautiful. Now for a tough question. Has South Africa failed to guarantee the right to education for children with disabilities? Well, an estimated 500,000 disabled children are excluded from formal education here in South Africa. This was revealed in a report that was released by the South African Human Rights Commission and Human Rights Watch yesterday. Now, to tell us more about this, we are joined today by the Executive Director, Africa at Human Rights Watch, Mr. Daniel Bekele. A very good morning to you, Mr. Bekele. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and thanks for being here.
The report says disabled children face discriminatory physical and other barriers when government classifies them according to their disabilities. Why and how is this robbing them of education?
Thank you. I really wish to begin by saying South Africa has actually made considerable progress in expanding educational opportunities since the end of apartheid, and the legacies of dealing with apartheid policies that has excluded generations of South Africans from educational opportunities is a huge one. But in spite of the progress that has been made, Human Rights Watch research has indeed found out that South Africa has failed to guarantee the right to education for a significant number of children with disabilities, which basically discriminates against them. and children with disabilities basically face multiple barriers when they try to access education from mainstream schools as well as special schools.
What is the problem? I see the numbers quite staggering. 500,000 in South Africa disabled children barriered or not getting formal education. That's a big number. How did you come up with the research? What kind of methodology? I see you've worked in 5 of the provinces?
Yes, the research work has covered 5 of the 9 provinces, and this number about at least 500,000 children with disabilities being excluded from school is actually a figure we have obtained from the Department of Basic Education. This is an information from government department. And the barriers children with disabilities are facing are when they try to access mainstream schools. Schools often turn them down, referring them to special schools, often without a proper assessment whether or not they should be referred to special schools. And when they go to special schools, the waiting list is long. You know, some have been in a waiting list for years, and they are subjected to pay fees to access special schools. And some of the special schools might be farther away that parents are not able to send their kids to school. You know, all this and a number of other barriers has basically excluded a number of children with disabilities from accessing education, both in mainstream schools and in special schools. As you would be aware, South Africa has actually claimed that it has achieved universal enrollment for primary education this year, but this figure and this research shows that this is actually not correct.
What is the key obstacle for children in mainstream schools? Is it a question of infrastructure not being there, or is it a question of not the adequate teachers to assist?
Both of them and more. Basically, mainstream schools turn down children with disabilities because they think they should be educated in special schools. This is without proper assessment whether or not they should be referred to special schools. And the mainstream schools are not resourced enough to be able to accept and accommodate and respond to the needs of children with disabilities. And the staff and the teacher also need to be trained to be able to accommodate and respond to the needs of children with disabilities. So mainstream schools have the obligation to accept children with disabilities, and children with disabilities should also not be subjected to pay school fees. Other children without disabilities are not paying school fees. So it is multiple layers of barriers which is affecting children with disabilities as well as their parents.
In 2007, South Africa was one of the first countries to ratify the UN's Disability Rights Treaty, ensure that all children acquire the same skill set. 10 years on, almost, have we failed?
South Africa has ratified the treaty you mentioned and a number of other treaties that are relevant for the protection of the rights of children with disabilities. And South Africa has actually put in place a somewhat good policy about inclusive education back in 2001. And now, a few years into the road, that policy has not actually been properly implemented because the provinces have actually prioritized in building specialized school as opposed to implementing the idea of inclusive education.
What's the state of special schools? We now see the state of what we would see as normal schools. What's the state of special schools for children with disabilities? Are there many shortcomings there as well?
The special schools that we have visited, a good number of them are designed in a way they can respond to some particular kind of special needs of children with disabilities. But the most important question is whether the policy should be sending children with disabilities to specialized schools, which is a policy of segregation and further discrimination, as opposed to implementing a policy of inclusive education where children with disabilities are included in the mainstream schools. That is the policy that South Africa has actually put in place and which is in line with the international commitments and which really needs to be implemented.
Well, I thank you for joining us. It's an interesting report and an interesting statistic. That's Executive Director Africa at Human Rights Watch, Mr. Daniel Bekele. Thank you very much for joining us. The number is simply concerning. 500,000 children living with disabilities in South Africa are sitting outside of the formal education sector, or the report says they're excluded from formal education. Very concerning. But let's have a look quickly at what's on Newsroom's Facebook page. Of course, there you can get all the latest, everything on Oscar and the Steenkamp family. A family of Reva Steenkamp, of course, says a 10-month incarceration for taking a life is not enough for the Blade Runner. The Steenkamp say they had forgiven Pistorius, but are not content with a 10-month jail term. Then, Mali's UN peacekeeping mission deployed troops around a northern separatist stronghold yesterday, seeking to prevent an escalation of clashes between rebels and pro-government militias that threatened to torpedo a peace deal there. And Thai authorities said they are looking for accomplices of the chief suspect for the Bangkok Shrine bomb blast that killed 22 people. A man who was captured on CCTV dumping a backpack and walking away is the main suspect. Of course, for more news and updates, go directly to Newsroom Facebook page. In the search bar, you know it, put SABC Newsroom, we pop up, like the page, and we'll get all the latest all the time. Let's now take a quick look at what's happening around the country here in South Africa today. We start in Johannesburg with a cross-examination of former Josie FM DJ Donald Sebolai is expected to conclude at the High Court sitting in Palm Ridge. Sebolai is accused of stabbing his girlfriend Dolly Chabalala in June of last year. She died as a result of her wounds. Then in Cape Town, the Democratic Alliance are expected to file papers in the High Court to challenge the constitutionality of Police Minister Nadine Kleko's report. The National Assembly approved the ADA Committee's report, which exonerated President Jacob Zuma of paying back any money spent on security upgrades at his Nkandla homestead. But still in Cape Town, the sentencing of 9 men found guilty of contravening the Civil Aviation Act after dumping feces at Cape Town International Airport is expected to be handed down at the Bellville Magistrates Court today. Now, a Zimbabwean inventor says he has created a world first, an electric car that does not require conventional recharging. Maxwell Chikumbutso hopes this and his other green power inventions will put Zimbabwe on the international technology map. Lovely story.
A brief trip into the future with inventor Maxwell Chikumbutso. He's claiming a scientific breakthrough with this green energy technology, an electric car which he says converts radio frequencies into energy.
The powertrain, we did it in-house, which makes it the first electric vehicle in the world that drives without needing recharging systems. On the greener power off-grid machine, it's very unique. For the first time, energy is being generated using a radio frequency and without moving paths.
Chikumbutso is not the typical scientist. He dropped out of school aged 14 and says he's developed his blueprints through research and visions from God. A showroom in Harare showcases his prototypes. A helicopter that operates using any one of the 5 fuels, including paraffin, a drone and a household transformer that he says can multiply power 100-fold. But he says breaking his disruptive technology into the world has not been easy. He's failed to patent his work.
That's why we end up finding nuclear scientists, electromagnetic professors, so that they can assist us on the patent process. But as you are aware that in patents, anything that violates the laws of physics is not an industrial applicable solution. They classify it as a perpetual motion device.
Luigi Kupenala, a South African-based Angolan businessman, has poured millions into the project, but now believes it's time to commercialize. He says the Angolan government and a Brazil private energy player have signed up to buy some of their products, but that other investors don't generally believe anything credible can come out of Africa.
To judge ourselves from our skin color. We don't believe on ourselves, but obviously a new generation has another responsibility to change this kind of paradigm to another level, whereby we have to capitalize on our abilities in Africa.
Zimbabwean scientists who spoke to the SABC also expressed skepticism, but Chikumbutso brushes the naysayers aside. He says he's determined to ensure that his God-given gift brings energy to light up the continent and put Zimbabwe on the technological map. Shingai Nyoka, SABC News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
For the farmer, fire sometimes epitomizes a new beginning, purifying and cleansing the ravages of winter. With the help of the Children of Fire, Mita is now a social worker manager and helping other survivors to unleash their potential.
People should just allow people who are disabled or disfigured or whatever to be who they are.
Now happy and a bit more confident, Ntabiseng helps around at the Children of Fire with chores.
People must come with a full heart to give, not to do the selfie, ach shame, here's me and a burn kid.
Join me, Rifio Wemwilwa, on Bopelong every Saturday at 17:30.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a look at the stories making headlines today. The situation outside the Roodepoort Primary School seems to be calm this morning. Gauteng Education MEC Panyaza Lesufi says he'll meet with the mediation team as well as community representatives today. This in an effort to resolve the impasse at the school west of Johannesburg. Justice and Correctional Service Minister Michael Mashuta says he will know whether the release of Oscar Pistorius is lawful by Friday. Mashuta is seeking legal advice on whether the parole board was right to approve the release of Pistorius. He decided to seek for advice after receiving a petition from the Progressive Women's Movement of South Africa. And the National Prosecuting Authority will formally withdraw the charges against its deputy head, Mqobo Jiba, today. The newly appointed head of the NPA, Sean Abrams, made the announcement yesterday. He says the decision was made following consultations with various legal experts who agreed that the case was not winnable. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for SABC Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Evan, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. Sex workers around the world continue to face stigma, discrimination, violence, including marginalization and a lack of adequate health services, something which Amnesty International is hoping to change. Last week, the humanitarian organization approved a controversial policy to endorse the decriminalization of the sex trade. But the decision has been met with different views, with most feminist and women's rights groups saying the policy will give legitimacy to pimps and brothel owners and allow the sex industry to thrive. Now, from our studios in Cape Town, we are joined by Soraya Mentor, who is the Advocacy and Campaigns Coordinator from Embrace Dignity. A very good morning to you, Soraya. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning.
Amnesty International approved a controversial policy to endorse the decriminalization of the sex trade totally. What is your take on that?
Embrace Dignity is an organization that was started during the World Cup. And initially it was just a lobby group wanting to lobby and advocate for law reform. There was a very big ask from prostitutes who wanting to exit, and the organization started to deliver services to these women. And we believe, and based on our research and our experience working with these women over the last few years, is that by Amnesty International saying that they're calling for total decriminalization is really supporting and expanding a very exploitative and harmful industry.
Exploitative and harmful. And you say that it will allow the industry to thrive. But surely it is an industry, and we can't put our heads in the sand and make as if it's not a very big part of the way we live today.
Sure. And as an organization, we do believe that women have a choice. However, in the context of South Africa, what does that choice mean? We are saying that women are coerced into prostitution, they are prostituted, they are trafficked, they are exposed to the most horrific kind of violations. And by doing this and by calling for the complete decriminalization is really going to give legitimacy to this. It's really going to give expanding this industry and giving pimps and brothel owners free will to just do what they want.
But surely, Soraya, when an industry is regulated and you have to comply with the laws that govern it, the protection is then there for those that work within that industry, and you can then look after the people that work in there. And I don't believe that all people that work in the industry do so against their will.
Of course, but in a country like South Africa, and we are a developing country, and we have the most progressive laws and we have the most progressive constitution, but in a country where the vast majority of the population are living in poverty, there's inequality, there's patriarchy. In a system like that, what does it mean? What does human rights and dignity mean when I wanting to go and access services at a local clinic and I'm a prostitute? Or I am a poor woman? What does it mean? It doesn't mean that the law says I have access to it, that people who's not conscientized to deal with me to come, and so I will be judged.
Surely, Soraya, when you talk about rights, it is anyone's right to then decide they want to pursue this as a career. That right in our Constitution has to be protected as well.
Sure, so I also have the right to a free education. I also have the right to basic services. But a woman growing up in Khayelitsha or any rural village who doesn't have a choice but to go into this,
Can I ask you this?
We are saying it is exploitative.
There is an element of it that is exploitative, as is every single industry that we see in the Western world today. What do you say? How do we, if you don't want it to be regulated and legalized, how are we going to protect those people working in the industry now? And this industry is never going to go away. It's the oldest profession. How are we going to protect the vulnerable? What is your plan to protect the vulnerable and at risk right now?
So our research have shown that women who are in this industry are not there because they want to be there. Every single woman who we've come across and has called out for help are saying that it's an industry that they don't like doing this. They would want to exit from this. And it is for us as Embrace Dignity and for government and for laws to be implemented to ensure that there's proper services for these women to exit. And we are talking about fulfilling women's practical needs, gender needs, and also fulfilling strategic gender needs. So it is about why are women there in the first place? And some women might be there because they don't have fees for their kids. Their grandmother might be ill and they might be buying medication. So it's those kind of practical needs. But they are there because of the economic circumstances. They are there because sometimes they are coerced to be there. And so we have to look at systems. And we are saying women are doing this because of the economic system and because of patriarchy that is in favor of men. And so a guy can just decide to buy my body and exploit my body. And we are saying that we are not
if you are okay with that, then surely, and if it's by the law, then it's okay. We are adults that can make these decisions for ourselves. I thank you for joining us, though, Soraya. We've run out of time. It's a conversation that we'll take forward tomorrow. Hopefully, you'll watch tomorrow because we'll speak to Amnesty International and find their views, what they believe will happen if sex work is decriminalized, not just in South Africa, but around the world. Thank you for joining us today and giving us your views. That is Soraya Mentor, who is a coordinator at Embrace Dignity. They are against the decriminalization of sex work completely. Now, it's been reported that 12 people have been injured after one of the new Afro 400 locomotives partially derailed outside Kimberley in the Northern Cape this morning. ER24 emergency services arrived to find the train with 7 carriages overturned. Russell Meyering, join us on the line from the accident scene. Good morning, Russell. Just give us a quick update.
Morning, sir. Thank you very much. Well, as you stated, numerous people were injured last night, or in the early hours of this morning, when several of the cars from the train overturned and derailed. We arrived on scene and we found that these 12 patients had sustained, fortunately, only minor to moderate injuries in this incident. We did treat them on scene and transport them to Kimberley Hospital for further assessment.
Russell, is this one of the new trains?
It is believed to be one of the new trains, yes.
It doesn't fit on the line, does it?
we're not too sure of that, unfortunately.
Well, Russell, I thank you for that update. It's a developing story. We'll keep you updated as to how that derailment, 12 people injured. Russell says 12 people injured in this. Now, in 2013, South Africa's rate of female homicides was 5 times higher than that of the global rate. Today, in our book slot, we take a closer look at what it is that drive women to commit murder. In Blood on Her Hands, Women Behind Bars, author Carla van der Spy went to 4 South African prisons in search of an answer to this very question. Now, the launch of a book will be taking place tonight, and she's in Cape Town to tell us her findings of what is a very interesting statistic. Good morning, Carla. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
South African women 5 times more likely to commit murder in general is a little bit concerning. But tell me, you've gone around and had a look into the minds of these women in and around the prisons in South Africa. What did you come up with, or what did you see?
Well, I went to 4 different prisons, and I went to speak mostly to women who killed. I also spoke to a prostitute and to a kleptomaniac and someone who has committed fraud. I've spoken to women who actually share cells with murderers. And what I found, if I can sum up the whole book in a nutshell, I would say that yesterday's victims are today's criminals.
That's very, very, very interesting. So it goes back to what happened in your youth, as Freud says.
Yes, absolutely. I found that most of these women, almost all of them, came from a dysfunctional background. They were sexually molested. They were neglected. They were abused. They were rejected. Lots of very bad things happened to them, and not one of those women that I met actually came from a fairy tale background.
That's an incredible story. If you think about the violence against women and children in South Africa, the high rape statistics, it kind of puts it in context why women in South Africa are 5 times more likely to commit a murder than elsewhere in the world.
Yes, and then also the big problem is the absence of father figures. There might be fathers, but they're not involved with the children. That is also a big problem. And growing up in an environment where crime is rife, and then the abnormal becomes normal. You know, if you grow up in an area where you are surrounded by gangs, where in every household someone is in prison, it becomes your normal.
Now, Carla, you did something very interesting. You spent Christmas in prison with the women and their children. How did this add to the story, and what did you learn?
Well, actually, it was about a week before Christmas. We were a few women who decided to give them a Christmas behind bars because, you know, a lot of these women never get visitors. Their family members are far, and they're very lonely over Christmas. So we actually hosted a Christmas party for them in prison, and but we weren't allowed to bring in food. They said it had to be authentic, it had to be prison food. But what we did is we got whole big bags full of gifts for them, and you'd be surprised at what is so sought after in prison. You know, something like pen and papers and deodorant. And that was an amazing experience, you know, to actually see how they live and to see the cell. And I mean, it's like 34 women sharing one single cell, 2 toilets and 2 showers. You know, I get very angry with people who say prisons are 5-star hotels, because it definitely is not.
Now, tell us about tonight. Tell us about tonight quickly, and then the tomorrow's launch for the book.
Okay, tonight the launch will be at the Book Lounge in Cape Town, and then tomorrow's launch will be in a church hall near Paulsmoor, and then 3 of the ladies that I've spoken to on the Cape Flats, who live on the Cape Flats, but who are beautifully rehabilitated, will also attend.
Well, Carla, it's a fantastic book, and it really asks serious questions about South African society in general. Blood on Her Hands, Women Behind Bars is a book written by Carla van der Spy. It's launching tonight, and it's something that's a very interesting read. Talks about women in South Africa 5 times more likely to commit a murder. 5 times more likely than elsewhere in the world. And Carla believes, well, it's because of what happens to women in South Africa, because the high levels of violence, the high levels of rape, and so forth. That is an exact reflection of what happens in our society. Just before we go, a quick update. The situation at the Roodepoort Primary School on Gauteng's West Rand remains calm for now. Yesterday, tensions, of course, flared up when some of the parents tried to prevent buses from transporting learners to Luferang, a temporary learning facility in Soweto, close by there. Yeah, quick, some of your...
This performance had a very special significance for the students.
Suffered over a period of time, and we will put a lot of them.
Wake up, you have to know.
Up the Healy, 150 horsepower might not sound.
Love it.